The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital hummed above me as I sat in the cold waiting room, my hands trembling against the plastic armrests. I watched my husband Mark disappear down the sterile corridor with Dr. Patterson, and something in the way they walked, shoulders close, voices low, made my stomach drop. When Mark returned 20 minutes later, his eyes were red, but he smiled and said everything was fine. That lie would unravel our entire marriage and reveal a truth I never saw coming. My name is Rebecca Morrison, and I'm 34 years old. For the past 8 years, I've lived what I thought was a perfect life in Seattle with Mark, my husband of 9 years, and our 2 daughters, Emma and Sophie, ages 7 and 5. Mark works as a financial analyst at a downtown firm, and I teach 3rd grade at Riverside Elementary. We have a modest 3-bedroom house in Ballard, close to the water, where the girls love to watch the boats on summer evenings. Our life had a comfortable rhythm, predictable and safe, until that Tuesday in March, when everything changed. It started with the headaches. At first, I blamed them on stress from planning the school's spring fundraiser, but they grew worse, accompanied by dizziness that made me grip my classroom desk for support. One morning, I fainted while reading a story to my students. The school nurse called Mark immediately, and by that afternoon, I was at St. Mary's undergoing a battery of tests. MRI, blood work, neurological examinations that felt endless and terrifying. If you're connecting with Rebecca's story, help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers by clicking that subscribe button. Your support means everything as we grow this community together. Dr. Patterson was a tall woman in her 50s with kind eyes that crinkled when she smiled, but there was something guarded in her expression when she reviewed my charts. She ordered more tests, then more consultations. Mark came to every appointment, holding my hand, asking questions I was too scared to voice. The girls stayed with my sister Linda during those weeks, shielded from the growing tension that filled our house like fog rolling in from Puget Sound. Then came that day in late April when Dr. Patterson called Mark into her office alone. I sat in that waiting room for what felt like hours, watching other patients come and go, each absorbed in their own private anxieties. The walls were painted a pale blue meant to be calming, but all I felt was the cold dread settling into my bones. When Mark emerged, I searched his face desperately. He took my hand and said, "The doctor says we need to wait for one more test result. Everything's going to be okay, Beck. I promise." But I knew my husband. I knew the way his jaw tightened when he was holding something back, the way his voice went half an octave higher when he wasn't telling the complete truth. That night, he held me in bed, his arms wrapped around me so tightly it almost hurt, and I felt wetness on my neck from tears he didn't want me to see. "Mark, what did she tell you?" I whispered into the darkness. "Nothing, baby. Just that we have to be patient. Try to sleep." Sleep became impossible. I lay awake while Mark pretended to doze, his breathing too measured to be natural. The Seattle rain hammered against our bedroom window, and I listened to it, counting the hours until dawn. Something was terribly wrong, and my husband was keeping it from me. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in our marriage. I called Dr. Patterson's office directly, bypassing Mark completely. Her receptionist, a young woman named Clarissa with a sympathetic voice, told me the doctor wanted to see both my husband and me together, but I insisted on coming alone. "Please," I said, my voice breaking. "I need to know what's happening to me. It's my body. It's my life." There was a long pause. Then Clarissa said quietly, "I'll ask her to see you at 2 o'clock today. Come alone if that's what you need." I told Mark I had a curriculum meeting after school. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth, but it was nothing compared to what he was hiding from me. I drove to the hospital through spring rain, my windshield wipers beating a frantic rhythm that matched my heart. The cherry blossoms along the streets were in full bloom, their petals scattered across the wet pavement like confetti at a celebration I wasn't invited to. Click that subscribe button right now if you want to see how this unfolds. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and each one of you makes this channel possible. Dr. Patterson's office was on the 3rd floor, overlooking the hospital's courtyard garden where patients in wheelchairs and robes sat under covered areas, escaping their rooms for brief moments. She stood when I entered, her expression carefully neutral. "Rebecca, I was expecting to see you with Mark." "Tell me the truth," I said, not sitting down. "Whatever you told my husband, whatever made him look at me like I'm already dying, I deserve to know." She gestured to the chair across from her desk, and this time I sat. The leather was cold through my jeans. Dr. Patterson folded her hands on her desk, and I noticed she wore no wedding ring, just a simple watch with a worn leather band. "The tests show a mass on your brain," she began, and the world tilted sideways. "It's located in the frontal lobe, approximately 3 centimeters in diameter. We need to do a biopsy to determine if it's malignant." The word hung in the air between us. Malignant. Cancer. Death. My daughters' faces flashed before my eyes, Emma with her serious brown eyes and Sophie with her wild curls and constant laughter. "Why didn't you tell me directly? Why did you tell Mark first?" Dr. Patterson's careful composure cracked slightly. "I didn't tell him first, Rebecca. He insisted on hearing any results before you did. He made me promise, actually demanded it, saying you were too fragile to handle bad news alone. He wanted to be the one to tell you in the right way at the right time." Anger surged through me, hot and sharp. That's not his decision to make. This is my life, my diagnosis, my body. He had no right. "I agree," Dr. Patterson said quietly. "Which is why I'm telling you now, despite his wishes. You have a right to know your own medical information." I've been uncomfortable with this arrangement from the start, but he was very persuasive, very emotional. "He loves you deeply, Rebecca. He's terrified." I understood Mark's fear, but understanding didn't erase my fury at being treated like a child who needed protection from reality. "What's the prognosis?" "Honestly, we won't know until after the biopsy. If it's benign, we can likely remove it with surgery. If it's malignant, we'll need to discuss treatment options depending on the type and stage. But Rebecca, I need you to know that even in worst-case scenarios, we have treatment options. This isn't a death sentence." I drove home in a daze, the Seattle skyline blurred through rain and tears. Our house looked exactly the same, the blue shutters I'd painted last summer, the small garden where Emma had planted sunflowers that were just beginning to sprout. But everything had changed. I had a tumor in my brain, and my husband thought he could decide when and how I learned about it. Press subscribe and join us on this journey to 1,000 subscribers. Your click makes a real difference in helping this channel grow. Mark's car was already in the driveway when I arrived. He'd left work early, unusual for him during the busy spring quarter. I found him in the kitchen, making my favorite meal, chicken piccata with lemon and capers. The smell should have been comforting, but instead it felt like manipulation, a guilty offering before the truth came out. "Hey, baby," he said, turning from the stove with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "How is the curriculum meeting?" "There was no meeting," I said flatly. "I went to see Dr. Patterson." The wooden spoon clattered to the floor. Mark's face went white, then red. "Rebecca, I can explain. You told her not to tell me. About the tumor. About my own brain. You thought you could decide what I could handle, what I deserved to know about my own body." He moved toward me, hands outstretched, but I stepped back. "I was trying to protect you," he said, his voice desperate. "I wanted to find the right words, the right moment. I didn't want you to be alone when you heard. So, you made me spend weeks watching you fall apart without knowing why? You made me think I was dying of something so horrible you couldn't even say the words? You let me imagine the worst possible scenarios because you thought you knew better than me what I could handle?" "I'm sorry," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "God, Beck, I'm so sorry. I was scared. I am scared. The thought of losing you, of the girls losing you. This isn't about you." My voice rose to a shout. Years of being the accommodating wife, the understanding partner, erupting in that moment. "This is my life, Mark. My body, my health, my fight. You don't get to take that from me by making yourself the gatekeeper of information. I needed you to be honest, not to protect me like I'm made of glass." He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Dr. Patterson explained everything, all the possibilities, and I just kept thinking about how to tell you without breaking you. I rehearsed it 1,000 times in my head, trying to find words that wouldn't destroy you. I sat across from him, the kitchen table between us suddenly feeling like a vast distance. I'm already broken, Mark. I have been for weeks, watching you cry in the shower when you think I can't hear, finding you awake at 3 in the morning staring at nothing. That broke me. The truth, no matter how scary, would have been better than the isolation of not knowing. The silence stretched between us, filled only with the sound of rain against the windows and Mark's ragged breathing. Finally, he looked up at me. What did Dr. Patterson tell you? That I need a biopsy. That they don't know if it's cancer yet. That there are treatment options either way. I took a shaky breath. I also know that you made her promise not to tell me, that you wanted to control how, and when I found out. That's what I can't forgive right now. Your subscription helps us reach more people with stories like this. Click subscribe right now and be part of our growing community aiming for 1,000 subscribers. The weeks that followed were strange and strained. Mark apologized constantly, but the trust between us had fractured. He accompanied me to the biopsy, held my hand during the procedure, waited in the recovery room with magazines he didn't read and coffee he didn't drink. The results took 5 days that felt like 5 years. I spent them teaching my classes, reading stories to 7-year-olds about brave animals and happy endings, while inside I felt like I was falling through space with nothing to grab onto. My sister Linda came over most evenings, helping with the girls while Mark and I navigated our new, uncomfortable dynamic. She knew about the tumor, but I hadn't told her about Mark's deception. That felt like a private wound, something I needed to process before sharing. Linda brought casseroles and normalcy, letting Emma and Sophie paint her nails bright colors and listening to their chatter about school and friends and everything simple and pure in their young lives. You're being strong, Linda said one evening as we washed dishes together, the girls absorbed in a movie in the living room. Stronger than I could be. I don't feel strong, I admitted. I feel angry and scared and betrayed. By Mark. I nodded, scrubbing a plate with more force than necessary. He thought he was protecting me, but he was really protecting himself. From having to see my reaction, from having to support me through the initial shock. He made my diagnosis about him. Linda dried a glass slowly, considering her words. Mark loves you. He's terrified. People do stupid things when they're terrified. I know. But I needed a partner, not a parent. I needed someone who trusted me to be as strong as I actually am. The biopsy results came on a Thursday. Dr. Patterson called us into her office together, and this time Mark sat beside me, silent, letting me ask the questions. It's a benign meningioma, she said, and the relief was so intense, I felt lightheaded. We can remove it surgically. The success rate is very high, and the risks, while present, are manageable. Make sure you're subscribed to follow the rest of this incredible journey. Hit that subscribe button and help us reach our milestone of 1,000 subscribers. Mark broke down crying, his head on my shoulder, his whole body shaking. I held him, feeling my own tears start, but there was still that distance between us, that gap created by his choice to hide the truth from me. Even in this moment of relief, I couldn't fully let him in. The surgery was scheduled for 3 weeks later, giving me time to prepare my classroom for a substitute and explain to Emma and Sophie in age-appropriate terms that Mommy needed an operation to fix something in her head, but that everything would be okay. Emma, serious and watchful, asked detailed questions about what would happen. Sophie just wanted to know if I could still read her bedtime stories when I came home. Their innocence broke my heart and strengthened my resolve simultaneously. Mark tried everything to rebuild the trust he'd broken. He was attentive without being smothering, honest about his feelings without making them my responsibility, present in ways he hadn't been even before my diagnosis. But I found myself pulling away, not consciously but instinctively, protecting myself from someone who had proven willing to control my access to truth. The night before my surgery, we lay in bed not touching, both awake despite the late hour. Rebecca, Mark said into the darkness, I need you to know something before tomorrow. I turned to face him. The streetlight outside cast shadows across his face, making him look older, worn down by weeks of fear and regret. When Dr. Patterson told me about the tumor, my first thought wasn't about you dying. It was about how I would survive without you. How selfish is that? My wife gets a potentially fatal diagnosis, and I immediately made it about my loss, my fear, my inability to cope. That's why I asked her not to tell you right away. I needed time to deal with my own terror before I could help you deal with yours. But in doing that, I abandoned you when you needed me most. I made you face your fear alone while I processed mine. I'm so sorry, Beck. I failed you as a partner. His honesty, finally complete and unguarded, cracked something open in my chest. I needed you to trust me to be strong, I whispered. I needed you to believe I could handle the truth. I do trust you. You're the strongest person I know. I just didn't trust myself to be strong enough for you. So I tried to control the situation, and in doing so, I hurt you worse than the truth ever would have. Click subscribe right now if this story is touching your heart. Help us build a community of engaged listeners by joining our journey to 1,000 subscribers. The surgery took 8 hours. Mark later told me he spent that time in the waiting room with Linda, my parents who'd flown in from Portland, and a few close friends. He said he couldn't eat, couldn't read, couldn't focus on anything except the closed doors that separated him from me. When Dr. Patterson finally emerged, still in her surgical scrubs, he said he stopped breathing until she smiled and said, "The surgery went very well." I woke up with a bandage wrapped around my head, a dull ache that pain medication kept at bay, and Mark sitting beside my bed holding my hand so gently it was like he was afraid I might shatter. "Hey, beautiful," he said when my eyes focused on him. "You made it. The tumor is out." The recovery was long. 6 weeks before I could return to teaching, months before the headaches faded completely, a year before I stopped automatically reaching up to touch the scar hidden beneath my hair. Through it all, Mark was present but different, more honest, more willing to show his own vulnerability. He went to therapy, both alone and with me, working through his tendency to protect others by controlling information, examining the roots of behavior he'd learned from his own father, who'd kept his mother in the dark about financial troubles until their house was foreclosed. We rebuilt our marriage slowly, like constructing a house after a hurricane. Some parts we kept the same, but we reinforced the foundation with honesty and rebuilt the walls with better materials, stronger and more transparent. The girls never knew the full extent of what happened, just that Mommy had been sick and Daddy had learned some important lessons about being a better partner. It's been 2 years since the surgery now. I have regular MRIs to monitor for recurrence, each one bringing a spike of anxiety that Mark and I faced together, sitting side by side in waiting rooms, holding hands and being honest about our fears. Dr. Patterson says the scans look clear, the odds of the tumor returning are low, and I'm considered a success story. But the real success story isn't my survival. It's the marriage that almost didn't survive alongside me. Mark learned that love isn't about protection but about partnership, that trust means believing your spouse can handle truth even when it's terrifying. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but rather integrating painful experiences into a new understanding of each other. Subscribe and be part of this community. We're building something special here, and your click toward our 1,000 subscriber goal means the world to us. Last month, we were at the hospital for my 6-month follow-up MRI. Mark and I sat in the same waiting room where this all began, and I watched as a couple across from us held hands tensely, clearly waiting for difficult news. The man kept whispering to the woman, and I caught fragments of his words. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it together. No secrets. Promise me." Mark squeezed my hand, and we shared a look that held everything, all the pain and growth and reconstruction of the past 2 years. When Dr. Patterson called us back, we walked down that sterile corridor together, truly together, ready to face whatever the scans would show, not as protector and protected, but as equal partners in a life we'd almost lost and then fought to rebuild. The scan was clear. As we drove home through Seattle rain, softer now than I remembered it being that terrible spring, Mark reached over and took my hand. "Thank you for forgiving me," he said quietly. "Thank you for learning," I replied. Our house came into view, the blue shutters a little more faded, the sunflowers Emma planted now tall and bright in the summer garden. Sophie's bike was abandoned on the front lawn where she'd left it after school. Everything looked ordinary, beautifully, perfectly ordinary. But it was built on something stronger now, a foundation of truth that could weather the storms we knew would inevitably come. Life doesn't give us guarantees. My tumor could return. Other crises will emerge. But Mark and I face them now with honest eyes, speaking truths even when they're difficult, trusting each other to be strong enough for reality in all its terrifying beauty. That's the real survival, not the surgery that saved my life, but the honesty that saved our marriage. The doctor's whispered words, "Don't tell your wife about the results," started as an act of love that became an act of control. In the end, it taught us both that real love isn't about shielding someone from truth, but about trusting them to face it, standing beside them not as their guard, but as their equal partner in whatever life brings. If you've stayed with us through this entire story, please subscribe now. Help us reach that 1,000 subscriber milestone and keep sharing stories that matter. Your support makes all the difference. I'll continue Rebecca's story, expanding the narrative with new developments and deeper emotional layers. Continuation *. 3 months after that clean scan, something happened that I never anticipated. Mark came home from work early on a Tuesday, his face ashen, and I felt that familiar spike of fear that had become my constant companion since the diagnosis. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately, my hand instinctively going to my head where the scar lay hidden beneath my hair. "It's not you," he said quickly, reading my panic. "It's me. I need to tell you something, and I need to tell you right away, no matter how scared I am of your reaction." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd had our confrontation about his deception. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, catching dust motes in the air. Emma and Sophie wouldn't be home from school for another hour. "I've been having chest pains," Mark said, his voice steady but his hands trembling. "For about 3 weeks now. I saw a doctor today. They want to run tests for my heart." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. 3 weeks, I repeated slowly. "You've been in pain for 3 weeks, and you're just telling me now." He met my eyes directly. "I know how it sounds. But this time is different, Beck. I made the appointment myself. I went today. And I'm telling you everything the moment I know it. I'm not waiting for results. I'm not trying to control the information. I'm scared as hell, but I learned my lesson. This is our problem now, not just mine." If you're finding this continuation compelling, don't forget to subscribe. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support keeps these stories coming. The tests revealed that Mark had developed an arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat that required medication and lifestyle changes. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough that it couldn't be ignored. The doctor, a cardiologist named Dr. Ramesh with a calm demeanor that reminded me of Dr. Patterson, explained that stress was likely a contributing factor. "The past 2 years," he said, looking between Mark and me, "have been extraordinarily difficult. Your body keeps score, even when your mind thinks it's coping." Mark started medication that made him tired and slightly dizzy at first. He cut back his hours at work, something he'd resisted for years despite my suggestions. He started walking every evening after dinner, and often I'd join him, the two of us circling our neighborhood as the Seattle sky turned from blue to purple to black. During those walks, we talked about everything. The girls' futures, our fears about aging and illness, the strange gift that crisis had given us by forcing us to be more honest. "I never want to go back to who I was," Mark said one evening as we paused at the top of the hill that overlooked Elliott Bay. The water was dark and rippled with wind, ferry boats crossing with their lights reflected on the surface. The person who thought he could control everything, who thought protecting meant hiding the truth. That person almost lost you twice, once to the tumor and once to his own stupidity. "You didn't lose me," I said, leaning into him. "We found each other again. That's different." But even as I said it, I felt the weight of new fears settling on my shoulders. Now it was Mark's health that kept me awake at night, listening to his breathing, watching his chest rise and fall, terrified that the irregular heartbeat would become something more serious. I understood viscerally now what he'd felt when I was sick. The helpless terror of loving someone whose body might betray them. The desperate desire to control the uncontrollable. Subscribe now and help us grow this channel. Every subscriber brings us closer to our goal of 1,000, and your engagement means everything. Emma, now 9 years old, was more perceptive than we'd given her credit for. One Saturday morning, I found her at the kitchen table with a notebook, writing something in her careful, neat handwriting. "What are you working on, sweetie?" I asked, pouring myself coffee. She looked up at me with those serious brown eyes. "I'm making a list of all the things that could go wrong. If I write them down, maybe I can prepare for them." My heart broke. I sat beside her and gently closed her notebook. "Emma, honey, why are you making that list?" "Because you got sick and then Daddy got sick, and I heard you tell Aunt Linda that you're scared all the time now. So, I thought if I could think of everything bad that might happen, we could make plans for all of them." I pulled her into my lap, this little girl who was growing too fast, who'd absorbed more anxiety than any 9-year-old should carry. "Baby, you can't prepare for everything. Some things in life are scary and uncertain, and we can't control them no matter how hard we try. What we can control is how we face them together, with honesty and love." "But what if something happens to you or Daddy? What if you die?" The question hung in the air, stark and terrifying. Sophie, 7 now and playing with dolls in the living room, went quiet, clearly listening. I realized both my daughters had been carrying this fear silently, watching their parents navigate illness and recovery, absorbing more than we'd realized. "Everyone dies eventually," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "But Daddy and I are both okay right now. The doctors are taking good care of us. And even when scary things happen, we're honest with each other. We don't hide the truth, even when it's hard. That's how we stay strong as a family." Mark appeared in the doorway, having heard the conversation. He came and knelt beside us. "Emma, Sophie, come here please." Sophie bounded over, and Mark gathered both girls close. "Your mom and I learned something important over the past few years. We learned that being afraid is okay, that being honest about being afraid is even better, and that facing hard things together makes us all stronger. We can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen, but we can promise that we'll always tell you the truth and face everything as a family." Make sure you're subscribed to continue following this powerful story. Click that button and join our community, working toward 1,000 subscribers. That conversation led to a family tradition we still maintain. Every Sunday evening, we have what we call Truth Time. We sit together in the living room, and anyone can say anything they're feeling, worried about, or excited for. No judgment, no dismissal, just honest sharing. Sometimes it's silly. Sophie confessing she's nervous about a spelling test, or Emma admitting she has a crush on a boy in her class. Sometimes it's deeper. Mark talking about his anxiety around his health, or me sharing my fear of the next MRI. The girls have flourished with this structure. Instead of absorbing unspoken tension, they have a designated time to voice their concerns and be heard. Emma's list-making has become less about catastrophizing and more about planning genuinely helpful things. Packing lists for trips, schedules for homework, meal plans she wants to try cooking. But my relationship with Mark continued to evolve in ways I hadn't expected. About 6 months after his heart diagnosis, I realized I'd developed my own form of the control he'd exhibited when I was sick. I was constantly monitoring him, checking if he'd taken his medication, asking about his symptoms, researching his condition obsessively online. One evening, he gently took my phone from my hands as I scrolled through yet another cardiology forum. "Beck, you're doing what I did. You're trying to control something you can't control." I wanted to deny it, but he was right. "I'm scared," I admitted. "I'm so scared of losing you after we worked so hard to rebuild everything." "I know. I'm scared too. But we can't live like this, with both of us constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. We survived our crises. Now we have to learn to live, really live, not just monitor and manage and prepare for the next disaster." His words resonated deeply, but changing behavior is harder than recognizing it needs to change. I started seeing a therapist of my own, Dr. Chin, a woman in her 60s who'd survived breast cancer and understood the particular flavor of anxiety that comes from having faced mortality. She helped me work through what she called hypervigilance, the constant state of alert that trauma survivors often experience. Your subscription helps us share stories like this. Hit subscribe and be part of our journey to 1,000 subscribers. You've been in fight or flight mode for years now, Dr. Chin explained during one session. First your own illness, then Mark's deception, then rebuilding your marriage, then his heart condition. Your nervous system hasn't had a chance to fully relax. It's waiting for the next threat. She taught me breathing exercises, mindfulness practices, ways to ground myself when the anxiety spiraled. More importantly, she helped me understand that healing isn't linear. Some days I felt strong and capable, other days, a simple headache would send me into a panic spiral, convinced the tumor had returned. Both were valid. Both were part of the process. Mark and I also started couples therapy again, with a new therapist named James who specialized in medical trauma. He helped us navigate the strange territory of both being patients, both being caregivers, both trying to support each other while managing our own fears. You're both trying to be strong for the other person, James observed during one session. But strength doesn't mean never showing fear. Sometimes strength means saying, I'm terrified right now, and I need you to be terrified with me. That permission to be weak together, to not always have it together, was liberating. We started having what we called scared nights, where we'd send the girls to sleepovers and spend the evening just being honest about our fears. We'd cry, hold each other, say all the things we were afraid to voice in daylight. Then we'd wake up the next morning and face life again, somehow stronger for having shared the darkness. A year passed, then another. My MRIs remained clear. Mark's heart condition stabilized on medication. The girls grew. Emma into a thoughtful preteen who wanted to be a doctor, Sophie into an energetic fourth grader who collected rocks and wrote elaborate stories about adventure. Our house filled with the normal chaos of family life, homework struggles and soccer practices, disagreements about screen time, and negotiations about bedtime. Click subscribe right now if you're invested in this family's journey. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers and keep bringing you meaningful content. But something else happened that I didn't anticipate. Other people started reaching out to us. A colleague at school whose husband had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis asked if we could talk. A neighbor whose wife had breast cancer wanted to know how we'd maintained our marriage through medical crisis. Mark's coworker, whose child had leukemia, needed advice on how to talk to siblings about serious illness. We found ourselves becoming informal counselors, sharing what we'd learned through painful experience. The main message was always the same. Honesty, even when it's terrifying, is better than protection through deception. Trust your partner to be strong enough for the truth. Face fear together, rather than trying to shield each other from it. One couple we met with, David and Jennifer, were in crisis. Jennifer had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and David had been managing all communication with doctors, filtering information he deemed too upsetting before sharing it with his wife. She'd found out accidentally when she overheard a phone call with the oncologist, and their marriage was falling apart under the weight of his deception. We met them at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Jennifer was thin and pale from chemotherapy, her eyes angry and hurt. David looked exhausted and defensive. I was trying to protect her, he said, the same words Mark had used years before. She's going through enough without having to deal with every detail. Mark leaned forward. I said the exact same thing. And I almost destroyed my marriage because of it. Here's what I learned. When you filter information, you're not protecting your wife. You're protecting yourself from having to support her through the initial shock. You're making yourself the gatekeeper of her own life. But she's sick, David protested. She needs to focus on getting better, not on worrying about statistics and worst-case scenarios. Subscribe and stay connected to stories that matter. We're building a community, and your subscription toward our 1,000 subscriber goal makes a difference. Jennifer spoke up, her voice sharp with barely contained rage. I'm not a child, David. I'm a grown woman with cancer, and I deserve to know everything about my own body. When you hide things from me, You make me feel helpless and infantilized. You make my cancer about you and your discomfort rather than about me and what I need. I recognized that anger. I'd felt it burning in my own chest when I discovered Mark's deception. Jennifer's right, I said gently. David, I know you love your wife. But love isn't about control. It's about trust. You have to trust that she's strong enough to handle the truth, even when the truth is terrifying. We talked for 2 hours that afternoon, Mark and I sharing our story, David and Jennifer slowly beginning to hear each other beneath their hurt and fear. We didn't fix their marriage that day, but we planted seeds, gave them language for what they were feeling, showed them it was possible to come back from this kind of betrayal if both people were willing to do the work. They reached out months later. Jennifer's cancer was in remission, and they'd been in intensive couples therapy. Their marriage was different now, scarred but stronger, built on a new foundation of honesty. You saved us, Jennifer said when we met for coffee again. Or rather, you showed us how to save ourselves. That conversation made me realize something profound. Our suffering hadn't been meaningless. The tumor, the deception, the painful reconstruction of our marriage, all of it had equipped us to help others navigate similar crises. We'd been broken and rebuilt, and the places where we'd been broken were now our strongest points, the places where light could shine through to help others find their way. Mark and I talked about starting a support group for couples dealing with medical crises. We contacted the hospital, and Dr. Patterson connected us with the social work department. 6 months later, we were facilitating monthly meetings in a conference room at St. Mary's Hospital, the same building where my tumor had been diagnosed and removed. Make sure you're subscribed to follow how this journey continues to unfold. Click that subscribe button and help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. The group started with just 3 couples and grew to sometimes 15 or 20 people crowded into that room, all of them navigating the impossible terrain of love and illness, trying to figure out how to support each other when both partners were terrified. We didn't have all the answers, but we had our story, and somehow that was enough. Seeing us, healthy and whole, and still married despite everything, gave other couples hope that they too could survive their crises. Emma, now 13, wrote an essay for her English class about growing up in a family marked by illness. Her teacher submitted it to a youth writing contest, and it won first place. The essay was beautiful and heartbreaking, describing what it felt like to watch her parents navigate fear and recovery, how Truth Time had helped her feel less alone in her anxiety, how she'd learned that strength isn't about never being scared but about being honest when you are. At the awards ceremony, Emma read her essay aloud to an auditorium full of people. Mark and I sat holding hands, tears streaming down our faces, as our daughter articulated lessons we'd learned through pain and passed on to her in the process. My parents taught me that love means telling the truth even when it's hard, she read. They taught me that families survive not by protecting each other from reality, but by facing reality together. My mom had a tumor, my dad has a heart condition, but what I'll remember most isn't their illnesses. I'll remember how they chose honesty over comfort, how they rebuilt trust after it was broken, how they showed me what real strength looks like. Sophie, 11 now, sat beside us, openly crying. After the ceremony, she hugged Emma fiercely. I'm going to be that honest too, she said. I'm going to be brave like Mom and Dad. Hit that subscribe button right now. Your support helps us share these powerful stories with more people and gets us closer to 1,000 subscribers. Life settled into a new rhythm, not the carefree existence we'd had before my diagnosis, but something richer and more textured. We knew how fragile everything was, how quickly life could change, and that knowledge made us appreciate ordinary moments more deeply. Saturday morning pancakes, Emma's orchestra concerts, Sophie's soccer games, the way Mark still reached for my hand when we walked, the way I still sometimes woke in the night and watched him sleep, grateful for every breath. My 5-year cancer-free anniversary came on a Tuesday in April. Dr. Patterson called it a milestone worth celebrating. At this point, the chances of recurrence are very low, she said during my appointment. You can start to relax a little. But I'd learned that relaxation doesn't come from statistical probability. It comes from accepting that uncertainty is part of life, that tomorrow isn't guaranteed for anyone, whether they've had a brain tumor or not. Mark and I had learned to live in the present, to find joy in the moment without constantly looking over our shoulders for the next disaster. We went out to dinner that night, just the two of us, to the same Italian restaurant where Mark had proposed 9 years earlier. The restaurant had new owners, a different menu, but the corner booth where we'd sat that night was still there. We ordered wine and pasta and tiramisu for dessert, and we toasted to survival. Not just mine, not just Mark's, but our marriage's survival through storms that would have destroyed us if we hadn't learned to be honest with each other. "Do you forgive me?" Mark asked suddenly, putting down his wine glass. "Really, truly forgive me for what I did when you were first diagnosed?" I thought I'd answered this question years ago, but I understood why he was asking again. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a choice you make repeatedly, sometimes every day. "Yes," I said. "I forgive you. Not because what you did was okay, but because you learned from it. You changed. You became the partner I needed you to be. That's all any of us can do. Recognize our mistakes and do better." He reached across the table and took both my hands. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing better. However many years we have, I'm going to be honest, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." If this story is resonating with you, please subscribe. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and each one helps us continue creating meaningful content. The waiter brought our check, and as we walked out into the Seattle night, the air smelling of rain and blooming trees, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Genuine peace. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of acceptance. Life was uncertain, always had been, always would be. But uncertainty didn't have to equal suffering. It could equal appreciation for what we had in this moment. Our daughters were staying at Linda's house for the night. Mark and I drove home slowly, taking the long route along the water. The city lights reflected on Puget Sound, and I thought about all the nights I'd driven this route terrified, before my diagnosis, after it, during Mark's health scare, through all the therapy and reconstruction and painful growth. "I wouldn't change it," I said suddenly. Mark glanced over at me. "Wouldn't change what?" "Any of it. The tumor, the fight we had, all the pain. Because it made us this." I gestured between us, trying to articulate something I was only just understanding myself. We were happy before, but we were also complacent. We thought we knew each other, but we'd never been tested. Now we know what we're made of, individually and together. I wouldn't trade that for anything. He pulled the car over into a parking lot overlooking the water. The engine ticked as it cooled, and through the windshield, we could see the dark water and the lights of ferries crossing in the distance. "I love you," he said. Not in spite of what we went through, but because of who we became through it. We sat there for a long time, holding hands in the darkness, listening to the water lap against the shore. Then we drove home to our house with the blue shutters, where memories of fear and recovery and growth lived in every room, where our daughters would return tomorrow with stories about their aunt and demands for breakfast and all the beautiful chaos of family life. Subscribe now and be part of this journey. Your click toward our 1,000 subscriber goal matters more than you know. The next morning, I went for a run in the cool Seattle dawn. My body moved easily, strong and healthy, carrying me past cherry trees in bloom and neighbors walking dogs and the everyday miracles of ordinary life. 5 years cancer-free. A marriage stronger for having nearly broken. 2 daughters learning that honesty matters more than comfort, that strength includes vulnerability, that love means facing fear together rather than hiding from it alone. I thought about that moment in the hospital waiting room 5 years ago, watching Mark disappear down the corridor with Dr. Patterson, feeling in my bones that something terrible was being hidden from me. If I could go back and tell that version of myself anything, what would it be? I'd tell her that she's stronger than anyone realizes, including herself. That the betrayal she's about to discover will hurt worse than the tumor in her brain, but that both will heal with time and honesty and work. That her marriage will become something better than it was, forged in fire and rebuilt with better materials. that her daughters will learn from her pain how to be honest and brave. That 5 years later, she'll be running in the dawn, grateful for her scars because they taught her how to truly live. The sun broke over the horizon, painting the Seattle sky in shades of pink and gold. I ran toward it, toward home, toward Mark, who would be making coffee in the kitchen, toward Emma and Sophie, who would arrive soon from Linda's house with their noise and energy and endless questions about life, toward the support group meeting we'd facilitate that evening, where couples newer to crisis would look to us for guidance and hope, toward all the uncertain tomorrows that stretched ahead, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The doctor had whispered to my husband not to tell me about the results. That whisper had nearly destroyed us. But in the end, it had taught us the most important lesson of our lives, that truth, no matter how painful, is always better than the most well-intentioned lie. That trust is built not by protecting each other from reality, but by facing it together, hand in hand, honest and afraid, and ultimately unbreakable. Make sure you subscribe before you go. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers and continue sharing stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us all of what really matters in life.